Today, we're going all the way to the beginning. Genesis is the ultimate opening act. It takes us from a dark, empty void to a vibrant, living universe, packed into 6 days of pure divine creativity. In the beginning, the earth was a dark, empty void. Then God spoke, with just 4 words. Let there be light. The universe ignited. On days 1, 2, and 3, God establishes order, separating light from dark, sky from water, and drawing dry land out of the seas. Once the space is ready, the Creator fills it. The land bursts into green with seed-bearing plants and fruit trees. On day 4, he sets the sun, moon, and stars in place to govern time, days, and years. The canvas is painted. Now it needs life. On day 5, the oceans teem with sea creatures and birds take to the skies. Day 6 brings land animals of every kind. God looks at the wild chaos of creation and calls it good. But he isn't done yet. The grand finale is next. God says, "Let us make mankind in our image." He creates humans, male and female, blessing them to be fruitful and to care for the earth. On day 6, God reviews his entire masterpiece and declares it very good. Out of nothing, he made everything, and he made you with a purpose. In Genesis 2, after completing the heavens and the earth, God does something unexpected on the 7th day. He rests. He blesses this day and makes it holy, setting a template for rest before human history even gets moving. Then the focus shifts to how it all happened. God forms a man from the dust of the ground and breathes the breath of life directly into his nostrils. The man becomes a living being and is placed in the Garden of Eden to care for it. Eden is filled with trees pleasing to the eye and good for food, including the tree of life. But there's a boundary. God commands the man, "You are free to eat from any tree, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." God observes, "It is not good for the man to be alone." After Adam names the animals and finds no match, God puts him into a deep sleep, forms a woman from his rib, and brings them together in perfect unity and innocence. They felt no shame. The stage is set, but everything is about to change. Genesis 3 is the turning point of the human story. It takes us from the perfection of paradise to the tragedy of the fall, introducing the origins of temptation, blame, and a promise of ultimate rescue. The ultimate deception begins with a question. The serpent approaches Eve, twisting God's words. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree? He flatly contradicts the Creator, promising that eating the fruit won't bring death, but will make them just like God. Eve sees the fruit is beautiful and desirable for gaining wisdom. She takes a bite and shares it with Adam. Instantly, the innocence is shattered. Their eyes are opened. They realize they are naked, and they hurriedly sew fig leaves together to cover themselves. They hear the sound of God walking in the garden and hide in fear. When God calls out, "Where are you?" the excuses begin. Adam blames the woman God gave him. Eve blames the serpent. No one takes responsibility, and the broken relationship brings heavy consequences. God pronounces the consequences: painful labor, a cursed ground of thorns, and eventual return to dust. But amid the curse, a prophecy shines. The seed of the woman will eventually crush the serpent's head to protect them from living forever in a broken state. God clothes them in skins and banishes them from Eden. Paradise was lost that day, but the plan for rescue had just begun. In Genesis, for Adam and Eve have 2 sons, Cain, a farmer, and Abel, a shepherd. When they bring offerings to God, Abel's sacrifice is met with favor, but Cain's is not. Consumed by jealousy, Cain's face grows dark, and a dangerous rivalry is born. God warns Cain directly, "Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Ignoring the divine warning, Cain coaxes his brother out into an isolated field, giving into his anger with devastating results. When God asks, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain infamously replies, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" But justice cannot be hidden. God tells him, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain is cursed to be a restless wanderer. Cain pleads for mercy. God places a protective mark on him and sends him away. Generations pass, and Cain's descendants build cities, develop music, and forge tools. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve are given another son, Seth, to carry on the family line. Amidst the growing darkness of human history, a faithful remnant begins to call on the name of the Lord. Genesis 5 tracks the family line of Adam over thousands of years. It establishes a rhythmic, heavy pattern for generation after generation. They lived, they had children, and then a chilling 4-word refrain repeats over and over. And then he died. Death has officially entered the human story. In this ancient world, human lifespans were mind-bogglingly long. Adam lives 930 years. Jared reaches 962. And then comes Methuselah, who clocks in at 969 years old, making him the longest living human being in recorded history. But right in the middle of this countdown of death, one man breaks the pattern. His name is Enoch. The Bible says, Enoch walked faithfully with God for 300 years. Then, at age 365, the pattern stops. He didn't die. The text simply says he was no more, because God took him away. The chapter closes with Methuselah's grandson, Lamech, who has a son named Noah in a world exhausted by the curse on the ground. Lamech prophesies, he will comfort us in our painful toil. By the time Noah is 500, he has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The stage is set, the countdown is ticking, and a global reset is just around the corner. As humanity multiplies in Genesis 6, things get strange. The sons of God marry the daughters of humans, leading to the birth of the Nephilim, mighty warriors of old. But with this power comes a terrifying darkness. The world isn't just bad, it's broken. God looks down and sees that every thought of the human heart is only evil all the time. It's a staggering indictment. The Bible says God's heart was deeply troubled, and he regretted making mankind. The verdict? A total global reset. In the middle of the corruption, there's one exception. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, while the world chose violence. Noah walked faithfully with God because of one righteous man. God decides to preserve a remnant rather than wipe the slate completely clean. God gives Noah the ultimate survival plan. Build an ark of cypress wood, 450 feet long, 3 decks, and coated in pitch. It's not just for his family, but for 2 of every living creature. Noah doesn't argue. The chapter ends with him doing everything just as God commanded. The warning has been issued. The blueprints are set. Are you ready for the rain? In Genesis 7, God gives Noah a final 7-day countdown. Animals of every kind, birds, livestock, and wild beasts march into the ark under supernatural guidance. At 600 years old, Noah steps inside with his family, escaping the coming judgment. Once everyone is inside, the Bible mentions a chilling detail. Then the Lord shut him in. The door of grace was closed. Instantly, the planet explodes into chaos. It isn't just rain. The fountains of the great deep burst open, and the sky tears apart. For 40 days and 40 nights, water relentlessly bombards the earth. The oceans rise so drastically that the ark is lifted high above the ground. Eventually, even the highest mountains under heaven are covered by over 20 feet of water. The world becomes a giant ocean. Everything on dry land with the breath of life in its nostrils perishes. The judgment is absolute. Wiped from the face of the earth are the cities, the violence, and the corruption. Only Noah remains, along with those safe inside the ark, floating over a drowned world for 150 days. When the storm of judgment hits, where will you be standing? Floating on a global ocean. In Genesis 8, the remnants of humanity wait. Then, the Bible says, God remembered Noah. He sends a powerful wind across the earth. The rain stops, and the deep floodgates close. Steadily, the waters begin to drop. The ark grinds to a halt on the mountains of Ararat. To test the ground, Noah releases a raven, then a dove. The first time, the dove returns empty-handed. But the second time, it flies back with a freshly plucked olive leaf. Hope has returned to the earth. After a full year inside, the ground is completely dry. God issues the command, come out of the ark. Noah, his family, and every living creature step onto a completely reset planet, blessed by God to multiply and fill the earth once again. The very first thing Noah does is build an altar of thanksgiving. God smells the pleasing aroma and makes a covenant in his heart. He promises never again to destroy all living creatures, declaring that as long as the earth endures, seedtime and harvest, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. Every time the seasons change, you are witnessing God's promise to Noah. Standing on a freshly cleared planet, in Genesis 9, God blesses Noah and his sons with a massive change. For the first time, God expands their menu, saying, everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. But he institutes a strict law, respect for lifeblood. Then, God signs the ultimate peace treaty with the earth. He promises never again to destroy all life with a global flood. The signature, a rainbow in the clouds. God says, whenever the rainbow appears, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant. But paradise isn't restored. Noah plants a vineyard, gets drunk on the wine, and lies uncovered in his tent. His son Ham sees him and gossips, but his other sons, Shem and Japheth, walk in backward to respectfully cover their father without looking. When Noah wakes up, he realizes what happened. He blesses Shem and Japheth, but places a heavy curse on Ham's son, Canaan, even after surviving the apocalypse. Human dysfunction returns. 350 years later, Noah dies at the age of 950. Humanity failed again. But God's promise in the sky remained. How did three brothers populate the entire planet? Genesis 10 maps out the global reset. From Japheth come the maritime peoples moving toward Europe. From Ham, the people from the nations of Africa and the Middle East. And from Shem come the Semitic peoples of the East. Hidden inside this family tree is a legendary figure, Nimrod. The Bible calls him a mighty hunter and history's first global ruler. Nimrod didn't just hunt wild animals. He built empires, founding legendary ancient superpowers like Babylon and Nineveh. This chapter drops major Easter eggs for the rest of history. It traces the origin of Israel's greatest future rivals, the Philistines, the Babylonians, and the Canaanites. It even subtly maps out the early borders of Canaan, reaching all the way to a notorious place called Sodom. The Bible mentions a man named Peleg, noting that in his time the earth was divided. From these 70 original clans, nations, and languages, humanity rapidly spreads out across the face of the globe. After the cataclysmic flood, every culture, language, and nation on earth traces back to the exact same root. Imagine a world where everyone spoke the exact same language. No language barriers, no translation apps. After the flood, in Genesis 11, humanity settles on a plain in Shinar and decides to use their perfect unity to build a massive skyscraper that reaches the heavens. Their goal? Let us make a name for ourselves so we won't be scattered. It was the ultimate act of pride and defiance against God's command to fill the earth. God comes down to look at the city and notes that with one language, nothing they plan will be impossible for them. So, God executes a brilliant, bloodless judgment. He confuses their language. Instantly, communication breaks down. Arguments erupt. Construction halts. And the place is named Babel, scattered by their new dialects. Groups pack up and move across the globe. The chapter then switches gears, tracking the family line of Shem as lifespans begin to drop. It narrows down through the generations until it lands on a man named Terah, his son Abram, and Abram's childless wife, Sarai. They pack up and journey out of Ur. God is about to call ordinary man to change history. At 75 years old, in Genesis 12, a man named Abram receives a staggering command from God. Leave your country, your people, and everything you know, and walk into the unknown. The reward? God promises to make him into a great nation and bless the entire world through him. Abram packs up his wife, Sarai, and his nephew, Lot, and obeys. When they arrive in Canaan, God tells him, "To your offspring I will give this land." But just as Abram builds an altar of worship, a severe famine hits the land, forcing them to flee south to Egypt to survive. Fearing that the Egyptians will kill him to take his beautiful wife, Abram makes a desperate, flawed move. He tells Sarai, "Say you are my sister." Sure enough, Pharaoh's officials notice her beauty, and she is taken directly into the royal palace while Abram is showered with riches. But God protects the covenant. He strikes Pharaoh's household with terrible diseases until the truth comes out. Furious, Pharaoh confronts Abram. "Why did you say she was your sister?" Pharaoh orders his men to deport Abram, sending him away with his wife and all his new wealth. Abram failed his first major character test, but God's promise proved bigger than his fear. In Genesis 13, Abram exits Egypt incredibly wealthy in silver, gold, and livestock. His nephew, Lot, is loaded too. But there's a massive problem. The land can't support both of their giant estates. Fights break out between their herders, threatening to tear the family apart. To keep the peace, Abram makes a shockingly generous move. As the elder, he has the right to the best land. Instead, he tells Lot, "Let's not quarrel. Choose whatever you want. If you go left, I'll go right." Lot looks out and sees the fertile plain of the Jordan. It looks like paradise, like the Garden of Eden. So, Lot claims the lush valley for himself and moves his tents right next to a city called Sodom. The Bible drops a massive warning. The people there were sinning greatly against the Lord. Left with the rugged hills of Canaan, Abram is visited by God. God tells him, "Look as far as you can see in every direction. All this land I will give to you and your offspring forever." God promises to make his descendants as uncountably vast as the dust of the earth. Lot chose with his eyes. Abram chose with his faith. Who do you think made the better choice? The first major world war breaks out in Genesis 14. 4 powerful eastern kings crush a rebellion of 5 local kings, including the rulers of Sodom and Gomorrah. The invaders loot the cities, taking all the food, goods, and a very important hostage, Abram's nephew Lot. A survivor escapes and tells Abram the Hebrew. Abram doesn't hesitate. He calls up 318 trained men born in his own household. They track the massive enemy army all the way north, executing a brilliant nighttime ambush. Abram splits his forces and completely routs the invaders. Abram rescues Lot, all his possessions, and the captives. On his triumphant return, he is met by a mysterious figure named Melchizedek, the king of Salem and priest of God Most High. Melchizedek blesses Abram with bread and wine, and Abram honors him by giving him a tenth of everything. Then the greedy king of Sodom tells Abram, "Give me the people, keep the loot for yourself." But Abram shuts him down instantly. He refuses to take even a single sandal strap or thread, declaring, "I swear to God Most High, you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.'" Abram proved he was a lethal warrior, a loyal uncle, and a man who couldn't be bought. In Genesis 15, God tells a childless, aging Abram, "Do not be afraid. I am your shield." But Abram is brutally honest. What's the point? I have no children, and a servant will inherit everything. God takes him outside and says, "Look up. Count the stars if you can. That is how vast your family will be." Even though it seems biologically impossible, the Bible records a massive moment. Abram believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. But when Abram asks for a sign to guarantee he will actually possess the promised land, God tells him to prepare an ancient covenant ritual. As darkness falls, Abram falls into a deep, heavy sleep. God drops a shocking prophecy about the future. Abram's descendants will be enslaved in a foreign land for 400 years. But God promises to judge that nation, bring them out with great wealth, and bring them right back to this land. In ancient times, both parties walked between sacrificed elements to say, "If I break this promise, may I end up like this." But here, Abram doesn't walk. Instead, a smoking firepot and a blazing torch pass through alone. God takes 100% of the responsibility to keep the promise. God signed the contract in fire. The land was promised, and the future was secure. 10 years in the promised land in Genesis 16, and still no baby. Frustrated by the wait, Sarah makes a desperate decision. She tells Abram to marry her Egyptian servant, Hagar, to build a family through her. Abram agrees, bypassing God's timeline, and the plan instantly backfires. Hagar becomes pregnant, and intense jealousy fractures the household. Bitter arguments erupt, and Sarai mistreats Hagar so harshly that she flees into the brutal wilderness, completely alone, pregnant, and facing certain death. But she isn't alone. The angel of the Lord finds her by a desert spring. He validates her pain, instructs her to return, and gives her a massive promise. Her son, Ishmael, will father an uncountably large family line. Stunned, Hagar gives God a beautiful name. El-Ry, the God who sees me. Hagar finds the courage to return. At 86 years old, Abram celebrates the birth of his son and names him Ishmael, which means God hears. The family drama isn't over, but the reminder remains that God hears the broken-hearted. You might feel forgotten by the world, but you are completely seen by God. At 99 years old, in Genesis 17, God appears to Abram with a massive update to their contract. To signal a complete transformation, God changes his name to Abraham, which means father of many nations. He promises that kings and empires will come directly from his family line. God also changes his wife's name from Sarah to Sarah, declaring, I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. God gives a hard deadline. By this time next year, 90-year-old Sarah will give birth to a son. Abraham literally falls face down and laughs to himself. Will a son be born to a 100-year-old man? He asks God to just bless his existing son, Ishmael, instead. But God says, no, Sarah will bear you a son, and you will name him Isaac, which literally means he laughs. To seal this everlasting covenant, God commands a permanent physical sign to be carried by every male in the household across all generations. Abraham doesn't hesitate. At 99 years old, alongside his 13-year-old son Ishmael, he obeys God and initiates the sign on that very day. The countdown has officially started. The promise is locked in. In the heat of the day in Genesis 18, 3 mysterious men appear at Abraham's tent, recognizing them as divine messengers. Abraham springs into action, serving a massive feast of choice, meat and fresh bread under the shade of the trees. The guests ask for his wife, Sarah. One of them delivers a stunning prediction. This time next year, Sarah will have a son. Listening from behind the tent flap, 90-year-old Sarah laughs quietly to herself, but the guest challenges her. Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? As the men stand up to leave, they look down toward the notorious city of Sodom. The Lord reveals a heavy truth. The injustice and corruption there are so grievous that judgment is imminent. Realizing his nephew Lot lives there, Abraham steps forward to plead for mercy. Abraham begins an audacious negotiation with the judge of all the earth. Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? He asks. What if there are 50 good people? God agrees to spare it. Abraham boldly barters the number down. 45, 40, 30, 20, down to just 10. God promises, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. The negotiation closes. Heaven is willing to show mercy. But will 10 righteous people even be found? In Genesis 19:2, divine messengers arrive in Sodom to evaluate the city's rampant corruption and injustice. Finding shelter at Lot's house, they are quickly surrounded by a hostile mob from every part of the city. The messengers strike the crowd with blindness, revealing that the city's time has run out. At dawn, the messengers urge Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters to run. When Lot hesitates, the messengers grab their hands and let them out, delivering a strict command. Flee for your lives. Do not look back, and do not stop anywhere in the plain. As soon as they reach safety, the sky erupts. The Lord rains down burning sulfur, completely destroying Sodom, Gomorrah, and the entire plain. But despite the warning, Lot's wife looks back at the burning city, and she is instantly transformed into a pillar of salt. The next morning, Abraham looks down and sees dense smoke rising like a furnace. Lot and his daughters survive, isolated in the mountains. From this fractured family line come 2 sons, Moab and Ben-Ammi, who would go on to father the Moabite and Ammonite nations. A sobering reminder of justice, mercy, and the cost of looking back. In Genesis chapter 20, Abraham travels to the region of Gerar, and history repeats itself. Fearing for his life because of his wife Sarah's beauty, he uses the exact same lie he used in Egypt years ago, telling everyone, "She is my sister." King Abimelech takes Sarah into his palace, but God steps in before it's too late. He appears to Abimelech in a terrifying dream, warning him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is married." The king protests his innocence, pointing out that Abraham lied to him. God acknowledges the king's clear conscience and says, "That's why I kept you from touching her." Early the next morning, a furious Abimelech confronts Abraham. "What have you done to us? What was your reason for this?" Abraham admits he assumed there was no fear of God in the city. To fix the situation, Abimelech showers Abraham with gifts, returns Sarah, and vindicates her with 1,000 pieces of silver. Abraham then prays for the king's household, lifting a divine curse of infertility that had fallen on them. Because of the misunderstanding, Abraham failed the trust test again, but God protected the promise anyway. In Genesis 21, at exactly the time God promised, 90-year-old Sarah does the impossible. She gives birth to a son. Abraham, now 100 years old, names the baby Isaac, which means laughter. Sarah proclaims, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears will laugh with me." But the laughter quickly turns to conflict. As Isaac grows, family tension explodes between Sarah and Hagar to protect Isaac's inheritance. Sarah demands that Hagar and her son Ishmael be sent away. Distressed but guided by God, Abraham gives them supplies and sends them into the harsh wilderness. Deep in the desert, their water runs completely dry. In absolute despair, Hagar places her crying son under a bush and walks away, sobbing, "I cannot watch him die." But God hears the boy's cries. An angel calls from heaven, "Do not be afraid, Hagar." God opens her eyes to reveal a hidden well of water, saving their lives. God stays with Ishmael as he grows into a skilled archer in the desert, promising to make him a great nation. Back in Canaan, foreign kings recognize God's undeniable favor on Abraham, leading to a historic peace treaty at a well-named Beersheba, where Abraham worships the eternal God. Deserts may dry up, but God's promises never run out of water. God tests Abraham with a staggering request in Genesis 22. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and offer him as a sacrifice." For 3 excruciating days, Abraham journeys to Mount Moriah, carrying the fire and the knife, preparing to give back the very miracle he waited a century for. As they ascend, Isaac looks around and asks the heartbreaking question, "Father, the fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb?" Abraham looks into his son's eyes and delivers a prophetic line that echoes through the ages. "God himself will provide the lamb, my son." At the summit, Abraham builds the altar and binds Isaac. But just as he raises his hand, an angel calls out from heaven, "Abraham." "Do not lay your hand on the boy." Abraham looks up and notices a ram caught in a nearby thicket by its horns. Abraham sacrifices the ram instead of his son, naming the place Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Because of his radical obedience, God reaffirms his massive covenant, promising to bless all nations on earth through Abraham's descendants, who will be as countless as the sand on the shore. Abraham walked up the mountain ready to give everything, and walked down with a legacy that would change the world. At 127 years old in Genesis 23, Sarah, the mother of nations, passes away in Canaan. Grieving and broken-hearted, Abraham goes to mourn his wife, but he faces a practical crisis. He is a nomadic foreigner and owns absolutely zero real estate to bury her. Abraham approaches the local Hittites at the city gate. They highly respect him, calling him a mighty prince, and offer their finest tombs for free. But Abraham insists on full, permanent ownership. He asks to buy a specific plot, the cave of Machpelah. The owner, Ephron, politely offers the field as a gift. But in ancient diplomacy, this was a high-stakes bargaining tactic. Ephron casually mentions, "The land is worth 400 shekels of silver." But what is that between us? Abraham reads between the lines, accepts the terms, and weighs out the massive payment. The field, the cave, and every single tree on the property are legally deeded to Abraham in front of witnesses. Abraham buries Sarah there. This transaction is vital. Decades after God promised him the entire continent, this small burial plot is the very first piece of land Abraham actually legally owns. A place of deep mourning became the permanent anchor for an entire nation's future. In Genesis 24, Abraham is now very old, and he has one final, critical mission for his senior servant: find a wife for his son Isaac. But there are two strict rules. She cannot be from the local Canaanites, and Isaac cannot leave the promised land. The servant must travel hundreds of miles back to Abraham's homeland, arriving at a well outside the town of Nahor. The servant prays for a highly specific sign to find the right woman. "May the girl who offers me a drink and volunteers to water all 10 of my thirsty camels be the chosen one." Before he even finishes praying, a beautiful woman named Rebecca appears. When asked for a drink, Rebecca quickly lowers her jar, then says, "I'll draw water for your camels too," until they've had enough. Watering 10 camels requires pulling hundreds of gallons of water. Realizing God answered his prayer perfectly, the servant showers her with gold, jewelry, and discovers she is actually Abraham's relative. Rebecca's family recognizes God's hand in this and lets her leave. She bravely journeys to Canaan. One evening, Isaac is out meditating in a field when he spots the caravan approaching. Rebecca veils herself, they meet, and he brings her into his home. The Bible notes that Isaac loved her, finally finding comfort after his mother's death. A heavy labor of hospitality at a well secured the future of a nation. At 175 years old in Genesis 25, Abraham passes away and is buried by his sons Isaac and Ishmael. The focus shifts to Isaac's wife, Rebecca, who is pregnant with twins. The pregnancy is so intense that she inquires of God, who drops a heavy prophecy: "2 nations are in your womb, and the older will serve the younger." The twins are born: Esau, red and covered in hair, and Jacob, born holding onto Esau's heel. As they grow, they couldn't be more different. Esau becomes a rugged, skillful hunter loved by his father. Jacob is a quiet homebody who stays among the tents, favored by his mother. One day, Esau returns from the open country completely famished. Seeing Jacob cooking a rich lentil stew, he demands, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew." Jacob, seizing the moment, makes an audacious counter-offer. "First, sell me your birthright." In ancient times, the birthright meant double the inheritance and the leadership of the family. But Esau rationalizes, "I'm about to die of hunger. What good is a birthright to me?" He swears an oath, trades his legal birthright for a single bowl of stew and some bread, completely disregarding his spiritual legacy. Esau valued temporary comfort over a permanent legacy and changed the course of history forever. A severe famine hits the land in Genesis 26, and history repeats itself in the worst way. Just like his father Abraham did, Isaac moves to Gerar and protects himself by lying about his beautiful wife, Rebecca, telling everyone, "She is my sister." King Abimelech spots them acting affectionately, realizes the lie, and demands answers, but ultimately grants them royal protection. Isaac then plants crops in that land, and despite the famine, reaps a mind-blowing 100-fold return in a single year. Isaac becomes so wealthy and powerful that the Philistines envy him and sabotage his empire by filling his water wells with dirt. The king kicks him out, saying, You've become too powerful for us. Isaac retreats to the valley and begins digging. The local herders fight him for the first well and the second well. Instead of fighting back, Isaac keeps moving until he digs a third well that no one fights over. He names it Rehoboth, meaning room to flourish. Seeing his undeniable divine favor, the very king who banished him marches back out to beg Isaac for a peace treaty. Isaac didn't fight the dirt. He just kept digging until he found his promise. In Genesis 27, Isaac is old, blind, and ready to pass his ultimate prophetic blessing to his favorite son, Esau. But his wife, Rebekah, overhears the plan. Determined to get the blessing for her favorite son, Jacob, she helps him orchestrate an outrageous identity theft. Because Esau is notoriously hairy, Rebekah covers Jacob's smooth hands and neck with raw goatskins and puts him in Esau's clothes. Jacob enters the blind man's tent with a plate of food, boldly lying, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Isaac is suspicious. The voice is Jacob's, he notes, but the hands are Esau's. He leans in, smells the outdoor scent of Esau's clothing, and falls for the trick. Isaac gives Jacob the supreme blessing, declaring him lord over his brothers. Jacob leaves, and seconds later, the real Esau walks in. Discovering the fraud, Isaac trembles violently. Esau bursts into a loud, bitter cry. "He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing. The spoken blessing cannot be undone." Furious and heartbroken, Esau vows to kill his brother, forcing Jacob to flee the country in fear for his life. Jacob won the blessing, but lost his family, proving that shortcuts always come with a massive cost. In Genesis 28, after stealing his brother's blessing, Jacob is forced to flee for his life, sent away by his parents to find a wife among his relatives. He leaves behind everything he knows, with nothing but the clothes on his back. He stops in the middle of nowhere to sleep, resting his head on a hard stone for a pillow. Deep in sleep, Jacob has a mind-blowing dream. He sees a massive stairway resting on the earth, its top reaching all the way into heaven, with the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Standing above it is the Lord himself. God speaks, locking in the ultimate covenant. "I will give you and your offspring the land where you are lying. They will be like the dust of the earth." Then comes an unbelievable promise to a deceptive fugitive. "I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will not leave you." Jacob wakes up in absolute terror and awe, realizing, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. This is the gate of heaven." Early the next morning, he transforms his stone pillow into a worship pillar, pours oil on it, names the place Bethel, the house of God, and vows to give God 1/10 of everything. Jacob was running from his past, but he ran directly into his destiny. In Genesis 29, Jacob arrives in the eastern lands and spots a beautiful shepherdess named Rachel at a well. To impress her, he single-handedly rolls away a massive stone from the well that normally requires a team of shepherds. He is so struck by her that he weeps with joy. Jacob falls deeply in love and makes a deal with her father. "Laban, I will work for you for 7 years to marry Rachel." The text says those 7 years felt like just a few days because of his intense love. But Laban is a master manipulator and he's cooking up a trap. After the massive wedding feast, the night is dark and the bride is heavily veiled. Jacob marries her. But when morning comes, plot twist, it's not Rachel. It's her older sister Leah. A furious Jacob confronts Laban. "Why have you deceived me?" Laban calmly replies, "It's not our custom to marry of the younger sister first." To get Rachel, Jacob is forced to work another 7 years. While he loves Rachel more, the unloved Leah finds comfort from God. She gives birth to 4 sons, closing with Judah, the lineage that would eventually lead to King David and the Messiah. Jacob scammed his own father using a disguise, only to be scammed on his wedding night by the exact same trick. In Genesis 30, the ancient rivalry between sisters, Rachel and Leah, explodes into a full-blown baby war. Jealous of Leah's children, a desperate Rachel uses her servants to build a family, leading to a frantic cycle of births. Finally, God remembers Rachel, and she gives birth to her firstborn son, Joseph. With his family established, Jacob demands to return home. Laban begs him to stay, offering to pay whatever wages he wants. Jacob proposes a seemingly terrible deal. "I'll only take the rare, speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals as my pay." Thinking he's outsmarted Jacob, Laban instantly agrees. Laban immediately cheats by hiding all the spotted animals 3 days away. But Jacob activates a brilliant genetic hack. He places peeled, striped tree branches right in front of the strongest flocks at the watering troughs while they breed. Visually stimulated, the stronger livestock uniquely produce streaked and spotted offspring. Jacob plays the long game. Whenever the weak animals breed, he removes the branches, leaving the weak to Laban and the strong to himself. Through this ancient biohack, Jacob completely flips the economy, growing exceedingly prosperous with massive flocks, camels, and servants. Laban tried to rig the system, but Jacob rigged the science to take his destiny back. After 20 years of endurance, Jacob has had enough. His father-in-law, Laban, has cheated him by changing his wages 10 times. Backed by a divine command to return to Canaan, Jacob packs up his wives, children, and massive flocks, crossing the Euphrates River in a stealthy midnight flight. 3 days later, Laban discovers the escape and realizes his valuable household idols are missing. Furious, he gathers his men and pursues Jacob for 7 agonizing days, cornering him in the rugged hill country of Gilead. Laban is ready for war until God threatens him in a midnight dream to back off. Laban angrily confronts Jacob, demanding to know why he fled like a thief and stole his gods. Unbeknownst to Jacob, his wife Rachel actually stole them. Laban tears through the tents searching for them, but Rachel cleverly hides the idols beneath her camel saddle, successfully outsmarting her father. With nothing found, Jacob unleashes decades of pent-up anger, calling out Laban's exploitation. Laban proposes a treaty. They pile a massive heap of stones as a permanent border, swearing the famous Mizpah oath. May the Lord watch between you and me when we are apart. In Genesis 32, Jacob is finally heading home, but his past is catching up to him. He sends messengers to make peace with his brother Esau, the same brother who vowed to kill him 20 years ago. The messengers return with terrifying news. Esau is coming to meet you, and he has 400 men with him. Gripped by fear, Jacob splits his family into 2 camps for survival and sends a massive wave of gifts ahead to pacify his brother over 500 animals divided into strategic herds. He sends his family across the Jabbok River, leaving himself completely alone in the dark. Suddenly, out of the darkness, a mysterious man attacks Jacob. They engage in an grueling wrestling match that lasts until dawn. Seeing that, Jacob refuses to back down. The supernatural figure touches the socket of Jacob's hip, instantly wrenching it out of place. Even with a dislocated hip, Jacob holds on, gasping, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asks his name, then declares, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob walked into the night as a deceiver on the run. He walked into the sunrise as a limping prince of God. In Genesis 33, the moment of truth has arrived. Jacob looks up and sees his brother Esau marching toward him with 400 men, lining up his family safely behind him. The limping Jacob bravely walks out to the front and bows down to the ground 7 times. Jacob expects a bloodbath, but instead, history turns on a dime. Esau breaks into a full sprint, throws his arms around Jacob's neck, and kisses him. The 2 brothers weep together in a stunning display of radical forgiveness. Esau looks at Jacob's large family and asks, "Who are these?" Jacob replies, "The children God graciously gave me." Esau then tries to refuse Jacob's massive peace offering of livestock, saying, "I already have plenty, my brother." But Jacob insists, declaring, "To see your face is like seeing the face of God." Esau offers to travel together, but Jacob politely declines to keep his young children and livestock from being driven too hard. They part in total peace. Jacob travels onward to Canaan, buys a plot of ground for 100 pieces of silver, and builds an altar to worship the God of Israel. An army of 400 men marched out for war, but an act of grace turned them into an escort of peace. In Genesis 30, for Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, visits the local town of Shechem, but the local prince, Shechem, attacks and violates her. Surprisingly, he falls in love and begs his father, Hemah, to arrange a marriage. Jacob's sons are furious. They devise a deadly trap. They agree to the marriage, but with one condition. Every man in Shechem city must get circumcised. Desperate to wed Dinah, the prince and his father convince their entire city to undergo the procedure. On the 3rd day, while the men of the city are still recovering in agonizing pain, Dinah's brothers, Simeon and Levi, storm the city with their swords. They kill every male, including Hemah and Shechem, rescue Dinah, and completely plunder the city. Jacob is terrified that the surrounding Canaanites will unite and wipe out his family, but his sons fiercely reply, "Should he treat our sister like a harlot?" Ever needed a total life reset? Because in Genesis 35, Jacob had to do exactly that. God tells Jacob, "Go back to Bethel where we first met. But before they move, Jacob tells his entire household to bury their fake gods, purify themselves, and change their clothes. Literal spiritual spring cleaning. When they get there, God locks in Jacob's new name, Israel. God blesses him, promising that nations and kings will come from his family tree. But the journey gets heavy. On the road, Jacob's beloved wife Rachel tragically dies giving birth to his 12th son, Benjamin. Then, family drama hits when his oldest son Reuben betrays his trust. Finally, Jacob makes it back home to see his father, Isaac, one last time before Isaac passes away at 180 years old. Jacob and his brother Esau bury him together. We know Jacob, but what happened to his twin brother, Esau? Genesis 36 reveals how he built a massive empire. Jacob and Esau actually became too wealthy. Their livestock and households was so massive that the land couldn't support both of them. So, Esau moves his entire family to the hill country of Seir. This chapter is a massive family tree, tracking how Esau became the father of the Edomites. His sons and grandsons didn't just build families, they became powerful tribal chiefs. The Bible points out that Edom actually had a long line of functioning kings. Long before Israel ever had their first king, they were a fully established nation while Jacob's descendants were still growing. Even though Esau lost his birthright earlier in the story, God still multiplied him into a powerful nation. In Genesis 37, we meet Joseph, his dad's absolute favorite. He got a fancy coat, but his brothers, they got a whole lot of jealousy. To make matters worse, Joseph starts having dreams where his family is literally bowing down to him. Yeah, you can imagine how well that went over. When Joseph finds his brothers out in the wilderness, they snap. They strip his robe, throw him into an empty cistern, and literally sit down to eat lunch while plotting his murder. Instead of killing him, Judah suggests a better idea, selling him to passing Ishmaelite merchants for 20 pieces of silver. His own flesh and blood is sold into slavery in Egypt. They fake his death by soaking his robe in goat's blood, shattering their father's heart. But this wasn't the end of Joseph's story, it was only the beginning. Most people know the story of Joseph, but right in the middle of it, in Genesis 38, takes a bizarre detour into the life of his brother, Judah. Judah had 3 sons. The oldest married a woman named Tamar, but he was so wicked that God took his life. By tradition, the next brother was supposed to marry her to carry on the family line. He refused and met the same fate. Fearing he would lose his last son, Judah broke tradition and abandoned Tamar, left with nothing. Tamar planned a dangerous trap. She disguised herself in a veil by the roadside and waited for Judah himself. Not recognizing his daughter-in-law, Judah fell for the trap. As a pledge for payment, Tamar demanded his personal identification ring and staff. 3 months later, when Judah found out she was pregnant, he furiously ordered her execution. But as she was led out, Tamar sent him a message with the items. I am pregnant by the man who owns these. Judah instantly recognized them, admitted his hypocrisy, and Tamar went on to give birth to twin boys. Imagine being sold into slavery by your own brothers, but somehow you end up running the entire mansion. That is exactly what happened to Joseph in Egypt. His master, Potiphar, saw that everything Joseph touched turned to gold. He literally put Joseph in charge of everything he owned. But things took a sharp turn. Potiphar's wife tried to trap Joseph and get him to betray his master. Joseph chose integrity, said no way, and literally ran out of the room, but he accidentally left his coat behind. She used the coat to frame him, and Potiphar threw Joseph straight into prison. But you can't lock down a blessing. Even in prison, Joseph worked hard, stayed loyal to God. And guess what? The prison warden put Joseph in charge of the entire prison. The lesson? No matter how bad your situation looks, when you stay true to your values, you can succeed anywhere. In Genesis 42, guys get thrown in prison with Joseph. Both have crazy dreams that same night. Here is what they meant. The cupbearer dreams of a grapevine producing grapes for Pharaoh's cup. Joseph says, "You're getting your job back in 3 days." Then the baker dreams birds eating bread off his head. Joseph says, in 3 days, you're done. 3 days later, it happens exactly as Joseph said. The cupbearer is back in the palace, and the baker is executed. Before the cupbearer left, Joseph begged, "Please tell Pharaoh about me." But the cupbearer forgot him. Sometimes we feel forgotten too. But God is just setting up the perfect timing. In Genesis 41, the king of Egypt just had the weirdest nightmare ever. He dreamed that 7 skinny, ugly cows ate 7 fat, healthy cows, and stayed skinny. Then, 7 dead pieces of grain swallowed up 7 healthy ones. None of his magicians or wise men could explain it. Pharaoh was totally stressed. Suddenly, the cupbearer remembers Joseph, who is still chilling in prison. They rush Joseph out, give him a quick shave, change his clothes, and stand him right in front of the king. Pharaoh asks for the meaning, and Joseph says, I can't do it, but God will give you the answer. Joseph breaks it down. Egypt is about to get 7 years of massive abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. He tells Pharaoh, you need to store up 20% of all the food right now to save the country. Pharaoh is so impressed that he hands Joseph his signet ring, a gold chain, and puts him in charge of the entire nation. Imagine bowing down to an Egyptian leader for help, completely unaware he's the brother you betrayed years ago. That's exactly what happens in Genesis 42 when Joseph's brothers show up in Egypt looking for food. Joseph recognizes them instantly, but they have zero idea it's him. So, he decides to test them. Joseph accuses them of being spies. They panic and spill their whole family story, mentioning their dad and youngest brother, Benjamin, back home. Joseph locks them up, then makes a deal. Leave one brother behind as collateral, go home, and bring Benjamin back to prove you aren't lying. The brothers start regretting what they did to Joseph years ago, speaking in Hebrew right in front of him. Joseph secretly understands every word and has to step away to cry. He keeps one brother, fills their bags with grain, and secretly puts all their money right back into their sacks. When they open their bags on the way home and find the money, they completely freak out. In Genesis 43, the famine is getting worse, and Jacob's family runs out of food again. But there's a huge catch. The Egyptian leader told them not to show their faces without their youngest brother, Benjamin. Judah steps up, guarantees Benjamin's safety with his own life, and Jacob finally agrees. They pack extra money, gifts, and head back to Egypt. When they arrive, Joseph sees Benjamin and immediately invites them all to his house for a massive feast. The brothers panic thinking, we're getting arrested for the money in our sacks. They try to give the silver back to Joseph's steward, but he says, don't worry about it. Your God gave you that money. Then he brings out their brother Simeon, safe and sound. When Joseph finally sees his little brother Benjamin, he's so overwhelmed with emotion that he has to rush out of the room to cry in private, wash his face, and pull himself together. At dinner, Joseph seats all 11 brothers in exact order of their ages, leaving them totally shocked. Plus, Benjamin gets 5 times more food than everyone else. Joseph plays one final, high-stakes trick on his brothers. He secretly plants his silver cup in his youngest brother Benjamin's bag. When the guards catch up and find the cup, the brothers panic. Joseph declares, Benjamin stays here as my slave. The rest of you can go home. Years ago, they sold Joseph, but this time, Judah steps up and offers to become a slave, instead of Benjamin, to spare their father's heart. Talk about true growth. In Genesis 45, after testing his brothers to see if they changed, Joseph finally breaks down. He orders everyone out of the room, bursts into tears, and drops the ultimate bombshell. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? His brothers freeze in absolute horror. The guy running Egypt is the brother they sold into slavery years ago. Instead of getting revenge, Joseph tells them to come closer. He says, don't be angry with yourselves. God sent me ahead of you to save lives from this famine. It wasn't you who sent me here, it was God. Joseph hugs Benjamin, cries over all his brothers, and tells them to hurry back home to bring their father to Egypt. Pharaoh hears the news and gives Joseph's family the best land in Egypt, loading them up with royal carts, fresh clothes, and tons of food for the trip back. When their father Jacob sees the Egyptian royal convoy, his heart revives and he says, my son Joseph is alive. I am going to see him. In Genesis 46, 70-year-old family promise incoming, Jacob packs up his entire life to travel to Egypt. But first, he stops to pray. God gives him a vision saying, don't be afraid. I am going with you, and I will make your family into a great nation. So the entire clan, 70 people, total loads into Pharaoh's royal carts with all their livestock. When they finally reach the region of Goshen, Joseph hops in his chariot and races out to meet them. The second Joseph sees his father, he throws his arms around him and weeps for a long time. Jacob says, now I can die in peace, because I've seen your face again. Joseph immediately creates a master plan. He tells his brothers, when Pharaoh asks what you do, tell him you're shepherds. Egyptians dislike shepherds, so he'll give you the prime farmland of Goshen all to yourselves. Talk about a full circle moment. What started as betrayal ends with a whole family reunited and protected. In Genesis 47, Joseph introduces his family to Pharaoh, and things couldn't go better. Pharaoh hands them the best land in all of Egypt, Goshen, and even asks if any of Joseph's brothers can manage his own personal livestock. Then 1 3-year-old Jacob meets Pharaoh, gives the king a blessing, and settles in safely. Meanwhile, the famine hits hard. People run out of money to buy grain. So Joseph sets up a trade system, first for their livestock, and eventually for their land and labor so nobody starves. He gives the people seeds to farm and creates a law. 80% of the crops stay with the farmers, and 20% goes to Pharaoh. The people literally tell Joseph, "You saved our lives." Fast forward 17 years, the Israelites are thriving in Egypt. But as Jacob reaches the end of his life, at 147 years old, he calls Joseph in for one final favor. Jacob makes Joseph swear not to bury him in Egypt, but to carry him back home to be buried with his ancestors. Joseph promises, and Jacob rests in peace. In Genesis 48, Jacob is sick and nearing the end of his life. So Joseph brings his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to see him. But Jacob drops a shocker. He officially adopts Joseph's sons as his own. This means Joseph's family gets a double inheritance in Israel's future. Then comes the blessing. Joseph carefully places Manasseh, the oldest, under Jacob's right hand for the top blessing. But Jacob intentionally crosses his arms, putting his primary blessing on the younger brother, Ephraim. Joseph tries to fix his dad's hands, saying, "No, Dad, this one's the oldest." But Jacob says, "I know, my son. Manasseh will be great, but his younger brother will be even greater." Jacob finishes by promising that God will let them back to their homeland. In Genesis 49, on his deathbed, Jacob gathers all 12 of his sons to reveal what will happen to their future tribes. And he does not hold back. He calls out the older brothers for their past mistakes, telling Reuben, Simeon, and Levi that their bad choices lost them the leadership. Instead, the ultimate leadership goes to Judah. Jacob calls him a lion and prophesies that royalty and kings will come from his lineage. Then comes Joseph. Jacob pours out massive blessings on him, honoring how he stayed strong through hardship because God was with him. He goes through the rest: Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, and Benjamin, giving each brother a unique prophecy that shapes the 12 tribes of Israel. After asking to be buried back home in Canaan with his family, Jacob takes his final breath. After Jacob passes away in Genesis 50, Egypt mourns him for 70 days. Joseph gets permission from Pharaoh to take a massive royal convoy chariots, horsemen, and Egyptian leaders all the way back to Canaan to bury his father. With Jacob gone, the brothers panic. What if Joseph finally gets his revenge now? They throw themselves at Joseph's feet, begging for forgiveness and offering to be his slaves. Joseph weeps and delivers one of the most famous lines in the Bible. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish the saving of many lives." He forgives them completely and promises to care for their families. Joseph lives to 110, sees his great-grandchildren, and makes Israel promise to carry his bones back home when God brings them out of Egypt. That's a wrap on Genesis. Next week is the start of Exodus.